Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Parshas Vayechi, and it's the end of the book of Bereshis, and it's also the end of the story of Yaakov, Yosef, and the brothers. In last week's portion, we saw that there was a reconciliation between Yosef and his brothers after a long, intense relationship and going back and forth while they were visiting Egypt, but everything seems to be fine. Then Yaakov dies. They bury Yaakov in Israel. They come back to Egypt, and then it seems that things are not as good as we thought they were. What happens? It says the brothers of Yosef saw that their father had died, and they say, perhaps Yosef hates us. In his heart, he still hates us. And maybe he will return all the wickedness or the evil that we did to him. And they tell Yosef the following, that your father, meaning Yaakov, had commanded before he died, you should say to Yosef to please forgive the spiteful deed of your brothers and their sin, for they have done you evil. So please forgive us. Yosef cries. The brothers then fall before him and say, no, hineni l'chol avadim, we will be slaves to you, we will be servants to you. And Yosef says, do not be afraid. Ki atachas elokim ani? Am I in place of God? I'm not one to punish. That's not my place. You might have had evil intent in what you did to me, but God had good intent. And therefore, do not be afraid. I will support you and your family. And that seems to be pretty much the end of the story. Later, a few verses later, the Torah tells us that Yosef dies and he's buried in a coffin, or he's put in a coffin in Egypt. So what happened here? So some commentaries tell us that, what happened was that Yaakov used to have a meal with all the brothers. Yosef would invite them to the palace, and they would all sit together. And, sort of like the Friday night dinner that families have. And when Yaakov died, he stopped inviting them. They said, hey, something's wrong. And the commentaries explain it wasn't really wrong. He did it for a reason. But all of that is not in the text. The text just says they were afraid now that Yaakov had died. I'd like to offer just a simple explanation which is consistent with the way I understand human nature. And it happens in all families. Sometimes the father, the mother, the parents are able to keep the family together. There's no fighting. We try to limit the fighting when parents are alive. And you see that actually in the Torah. Because what happened? When Esav was so really upset and angry and wanted to kill Yaakov, he says, when Yitzchak, my father, dies, then I will kill Yaakov. He wasn't saying he's going to kill him now, although the story unfolds, Yaakov still runs away, and even before Yitzchak dies, there seems to be a possible confrontation, left for another discussion. But at the end of the day, it seems like the assumption was he would wait for his father's death. And that's often what happens. Often parents hold a family together. Children want to make sure their parents are happy and happy with them, and they feel that they are obligated to keep the family together. And it could be even those Friday night dinners or where everyone gets together on holidays. But then when the parents die, the old rivalries, the old jealousies, the old hatreds, the old arguments, they start to rise to the surface. Everyone remembers them again. And that's what's happening here. They're afraid. They say, maybe Yosef really hates us. Yosef was being good to Yaakov, and therefore he treated them properly. But really, he might hate us. Legitimately so, they felt, and they were afraid. There might not have been any explicit evidence that Yosef hated them. We don't know. But it's quite possible they just thought that might happen. So what does he do? He really, in a sense, lies in response to their possible lie. What am I saying? Most commentaries assume that Yaakov never told the brothers about how Yosef should treat him. Not only that, it's not clear in the Torah that Yaakov even ever knew. We don't know. But there's no evidence that he told them. It's possible he did, and sometimes that is left out of the Torah and we only learn it later on. It's not clear. But many commentaries assume he didn't tell them. And therefore, this would be a lie. And they say, well, you're allowed to lie, mibnei shalom bayis, because of peace in the household. Hey, you don't want to get killed. You don't want to become slaves. You want to make sure there's peace. You tell a little bit of a white lie, which is acceptable. But what we're really doing is, and the commentaries are assuming that hatred will be there. And the same way you covered it up in your parents' lifetime, now you're obligated to cover it up again. We have to assume that it's not always easy to completely forgive and forget. We wish that would be the case. We hope that that's how people act, and that's certainly an ideal. And many people are able to do that, to get over the past. But generally speaking, what often happens is the past is sort of deep down in there. And every once in a while, it could rise to the surface. And sadly, we see this when parents pass away. Talking to a litigation lawyer not so long ago, and he told me that some of the wealthiest families, after the father or the mother or the parents die, they sort of go after each other. You could read the newspapers and see this. And sometimes it's in families where we're not talking about the wealth has to be distributed for survival. There's enough money there, as he told me in some cases, for generations and generations to go, even if it's split many, many ways. But it's those rivalries. It's who deserves it. Who did my father or mother love more? Who worked harder for them? Who worked in the business more? There's a million reasons why we're still arguing. And there's a million reasons why those tensions might have gone back to when we were 7, 8, 10, and maybe teenagers. And they always rise, not always, but they could rise to the surface and often do. And therefore, the same way we covered it up or repressed that to make our parents happy, the Torah is really telling us that's what we have to do now. The brothers did that by lying, and I would suggest that Yosef is also lying. When I say lying, I mean there's many different ways a person deals with the problems of the past. And in the parsha before, the portion before, we see Yosef trying many different ways of explaining to his brothers why they shouldn't worry. My feeling is that he's throwing a lot out and hoping something sticks. It wasn't your fault. God wanted it that way. Don't worry. It all turns out for the good. And here he's saying something similar. He's saying, listen, I understand that you did something harmful to me. You wanted to do something harmful, but it worked out for the best. And that's what God really wanted. And the real lie, I think, is when he says, am I in place of God? He's borrowing this language from Yaakov, his father. When Rachel came to Yaakov and said, give me children, and if not, I will die, he said to her, it says he got angry, and he says, am I instead of God? I can't control whether you're going to have children or not. So there Yaakov was telling the truth. He couldn't control. He didn't know why she wasn't having children. That's up to God. But here, Yosef is really saying, I'm not in place of God. I'm not the one to judge you. But he really could have, if he wanted to. He was in charge of a good part of the Egyptian government. He could have done whatever he wanted to them. So what he's really saying is, I could, but I'm not going to. I don't feel it's in my place. And he gives a reason why, because God really intended for it to be good. So, it might not be a clear lie, but it's somewhat suggestive of not being 100% truthful. But that's what we have to do. Ideally, again, repeat, we should try to forget the past. We should get past that and just look at the love that we have for each other. But if that can't be done, at least repress it. Try your hardest. Work on that you want peace. Peace is important. And as the Gemara says, the commentaries say, you're allowed to lie for peace. Lying is bad because it just creates distrust. But sometimes the distrust of telling the truth or acting out on your emotions are much worse than the white lie that you might have to tell yourself or your brothers, your sisters, your family. And hopefully that's what we learn from this. The book of Bereshis ends off with, in a sense, almost a sad note that they still are afraid. But I like to say all the time, the good note is that they still survived as a family. We still are today, as the next book says, we're all part of Bnei Yisrael. We're all part of the children of Israel. We're all part of one big, not so happy necessarily, but one big family. And we've survived until this time, and hopefully, and Emiras Hashem, God willing, will survive for generations to come, both on a communal level and in each particular family. Good Shabbos.